It took a very long time for Christians to shake off the perception of the cross as a dreaded instrument of torture, and behind the rigor, the native rough and unforgiving surface of this wood, begin to see the dulce lignum, the kind and dear wood, the trofeo, that is the trophy or prize, and especially the arbor nobilis, the noble tree, praised in the splendid hymn we have just heard from the 6th century by Venantius Fortunatus, and you have it in a sheet in your handouts. Faithful cross, among all the one and only noble tree, no woodland offers any comparable tree as to flower, foliage, sprout, kind wood, kind nails, sustaining the kind weight. Imagine what happened in the mind of the theologian to whom, for the first time, dawned the parallelism between the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Golgotha, between the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, on which hung the fruit that caused our death, and the tree of the cross, dulci pondus sustinens, on which hung the kind weight of Christ's body, the tree which alone was deemed worthy to carry the price of the world. These parallels are not fortuitous. There was a plan, one might even say a distinctive style at work. For our salvation, God had acted with imagination. Thus, Christians started to see the cross as the arbor nobilis, which is not just the noble tree. Noble and knowledge come from the same root in Latin. The cross is well known and celebrated because it makes known, gives us the deepest possible insight into who the God of Jesus Christ really is and what really lies in his heart. Now we have this sentence, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Is Jesus here concluding a pact with the Father? Forgive them and punish me instead. In your anger, do not spare me so that you can spare them. Indeed, does not Paul tell us that the Father did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, and that we are saved from God's wrath through him, because while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. For many theologians, indeed, salvation is a transaction between the Father and the Son. A ransom is paid. The Father's honor is restored. His wrath is placated. His justice is satisfied. The doctrines spawned from this approach to the cross are known: satisfaction, penal substitution, vicarious atonement. These interpretations, I think, say more about the people or the mindset that came up with them than about God. As with any instance of human suffering, the cross fills us with questions. Why so much suffering? Did Jesus really have to die in this manner? In what way was this death necessary? Did God himself had to die on the cross? What kind of father lets a son he calls beloved endure agony, torture, despair of this magnitude? There is a branch of theology called soteriology devoted to thinking about these issues, and I have taught it many times. No authentic, adult, mature faith can avoid being urged by these questions and search for answers in Scripture and with the help of history, philosophy, and philology. Now, to borrow an image from winemaking, all this necessary work only is a preliminary. Sure, you cannot have wine unless you plant the vine, harvest the grapes, press them, let the must undergo several stages of fermentation and clarification, and of course know the science. Once all this work is done, though, winemakers need to step back, entrust the product of their hard work to a wine cellar, and wait the process of aging. Only in this way wine is made, and more importantly, its flavor develops, mellows, acquires texture. The same thing applies to theology. Painstaking research and thinking with the help of Scripture, history, philosophy is conducted in universities and schools, but matures, deepens, mellows only in the wine cellar of worship. And over the years, I have found that nothing has expanded and deepened my perception of the way God saves us and the role played by Jesus' suffering on the cross more than this magnificent hymn by Venantius Fortunatus, which I used to sing in Latin every day during Holy Week in the French Benedictine monastery, where I lived for almost 20 years. Its melody soars and glides, plangent and serene, apparently at odds with the distressing enumeration of the instruments of torture. Behold vinegar, gall, spikes, spit, nails, spear, and with blood flowing like a river. In this way, though, it bathes us in Jesus' gentle determination. His metis corpus, his kind body, and dulcis pondus, the kind weight, transform everything they touch. Even the harsh cross, even the unforgiving nails become kind wood and kind nails in this hymn. Meditating for 3 long hours on the cross can seem a long time. And yet, just like wine, our faith mellows and its texture grows only by lasting, waiting, expecting in the wine cellar of worship, silence, prayer, singing, and contemplation. Our questions: why Jesus is suffering, why our suffering, do not have simple answers. Meaning, like flavor, emerges only through patient and competent tasting. Jesus could have died of a sudden death. Instead, for 3 long hours, he left his kind body on display, because only through this lengthy exposure can our hearts of stones be turned into hearts of flesh. Let us be guided by Venantius' words then, through the conversion, through this change. We are addressed as if we ourselves were the cross on which Jesus is suspended. We are told, bend down your lofty branches, relax the tension of your guts, mitigate the rigidity of your nature, and offer to the body stretched out on you a gentle surface. Ours is the pride of the lofty tree. Ours the hard guts. We can fathom what God is doing for us, welcome the meaning of Jesus' sayings on the cross, only by letting our sternness to be changed into Jesus' meekness, by a flexibility to turn into his gentleness. Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." He knows that just as he forgives, so does the Father. Jesus' love and the Father's love are one and the same. Nobody has greater love for us than the Son who gives his life for his friends. But also nobody has greater love than the Father who so loved the world, says John, that he gave his only Son. They are totally at one in this, as Jesus was not tired of repeating, "I and the Father are one." Transactions occur between people who are at odds, have competing interests. The idea that this can in any way, even figuratively, apply to God is the most damaging and pernicious misrepresentation of Christianity ever occurred in the history of theology and spirituality, to the point that it has completely obscured the original meaning of the very word often used to express what salvation is, how it works, and how it happened. That is the word atonement. Atonement. It is a fascinating word. It appeared out of nowhere in the 16th century, probably coined for the Tyndale's English translation of the Bible. And it is a contraction of the word at and one. So literally, it means to be at one, a meaning which is completely obscured in our contemporary language, where it means make reparation, expiate, precisely the transactional theme which keeps corrupting the authentic Christian understanding of salvation. How ironic, then, that the literal theological meaning of this word should be the exact opposite. At one meant. That is, to be at one, to become one. The very pronunciation of this word hides its etymological meaning. We don't say at-one-ment, we say atonement. This is why you'll forgive me if from time to time during the next meditations I'll pronounce it differently. I'll pronounce it in this way, at-one-ment, to recover its original meaning, to show that Jesus saved us not because he was in a transaction with the Father, but because it was at one with the Father. And that being saved for us means becoming at one with the Father and with each other. What the Father wants is that we should love him, love the Lord, our God, with all our hearts, with all our soul, and with all our strength. The only way of atoning is acquiring a heart which knows its shortcomings, its wrongdoings, its deviousness, and yet wants to adhere to God, love God, to be at one with God.